11:42 p.m. The vibration of the phone sliced through the night like a sudden streak of light, turning the quiet stillness inside the Zurich hotel room into something sharp and tense. Ethan Cole opened his eyes immediately. He wasn't the kind of man who woke easily, and his life had never allowed randomness to force its way in. But there was something about that vibration, slow, steady, persistent, that told him this was not a call he could ignore. The screen displayed an unknown number from New York. Ethan stared at it for a few seconds. He let the first call go unanswered, but the second call came instantly, as if the person on the other end knew he was hesitating. He answered. On the line was silence, long, stretched, fragile. Then a very small voice came through, shaky, hoarse, worn out from crying too long. Are you Ethan Cole?" It was a child's voice. Ethan sat up, his tone dropping into that familiar, controlled depth. "Yes, I'm listening. Who is this?" Another pause. Tight, breathless, as if the child was searching for the exact words to say something that shouldn't have to be said. "My name is Grace." The girl's voice sounded like it was breaking. I think I'm your daughter. My mom is Lily Parker. She's in the ICU. The doctors said a family member has to sign the papers for her treatment. I didn't know who else to call except you." The world around Ethan stopped. Ethan Cole was a man who had spent his entire life controlling variables. He ran one of the fastest-growing biotech corporations in the country. His schedule was arranged in blocks that locked together like the beams of a steel bridge. His personal life was sealed shut like the classified archive floor beneath his company headquarters. No one knew what he really thought, what he feared, or what he felt. And it had been a long time since he had let anyone get close. Except Lily. But that was years ago. They had met in a fleeting, ordinary moment. In the lobby of the office building, her hot latte spilled onto his white shirt. Ethan's reaction had been irritation, sharp, automatic. But Lily just laughed softly, her eyes warm, and said something that made his entire world tilt for a heartbeat. "Sorry about that, but honestly, coffee suits you." There was something in her gaze, like late summer sunlight, not blinding, but warm enough for someone to lean into. They never defined what they were. Lily never forced him to name anything. She was just there, in late dinners, quiet laughter, and those small, gentle touches that softened his mind slowly, steadily. Until the day she said, "Ethan, I'm pregnant." He did not respond with his heart. He used logic, cold, precise, razor-edged. Every word he said then, simple as they were, was sharp enough to break something that could never be repaired. "I'm not ready. This might be a mistake, and we don't even know for sure if the baby is mine." Lily didn't cry. She just looked at him for a long time. Then she walked away, quietly, decisively. Back then, Ethan believed he had done the rational thing to keep his life on track. He didn't call. He didn't ask. He didn't look for her. And he told himself time would erase everything. But Grace's voice now shattered every wall he had ever built. Ethan stood up abruptly. "Grace, what hospital are you at?" "St. Luke's in Manhattan. Mom already went into surgery. The doctor said I'm too young to sign for treatment. They said we have to call family." The girl drew a trembling breath. "I remembered Mom saying your name once, so I called." No sobbing, no drama. Just the steady courage of a child who has learned to grow up quietly. Ethan said nothing else. He booked the emergency flight within 2 minutes, grabbed his coat and passport, and left the hotel without looking back. He had no plan, no backup, no risk assessment. For the first time in his life, he was running toward only one thing. If Lily didn't make it, and if Grace truly was his child, he would never be able to forgive himself. The flight from Zurich to New York was 5 hours, but for Ethan, it stretched like a lifetime. He sat in first class, wide leather seats, warm, dim lighting, but everything felt hollow. The plane window reflected his face back at him, tense, rigid, and for the first time in years, afraid. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Grace's voice. I just couldn't think of anyone else to call. When Ethan stepped into St. Luke's Hospital at 2 a.m., Manhattan outside was still drenched in that amber glow, reflecting off the wet pavement. The emergency wing was brightly lit and cold. Ethan presented his ID and checked in. Immediately, a hospital social worker was called, because Grace was a minor with no adult accompanying her. The woman spoke in a tone gentle but precise. We need an adult who can temporarily take responsibility for medical decisions on Grace's behalf. This is the temporary authorization form. You may sign it if you believe you have the right to do so. There were thousands of ways to refuse, hundreds of reasons to stay safe. But Ethan simply said, I'll sign. His name appeared on the bold line, Guardian Temporarily Responsible. In that very moment, something in him shifted. The pediatric waiting room was deep in the hallway. The cold, white neon lights washed over pale green vinyl chairs. Grace sat there, so small she looked like she might dissolve into the color of the hospital walls. Her hair was braided to one side, hoodie a bit too big, eyes swollen from crying and staying awake. Yet her gaze remained oddly steady. When she saw Ethan, she stood. She did not run to him. She did not burst into tears. She simply faced him. Her eyes, a pale gray blue, were heartbreakingly familiar. You're Ethan Cole, she said. It wasn't a question. Ethan kneeled so their eyes were level. Yes, and I... Grace shook her head. Just a small, quiet movement. Her voice was soft but clear. You don't need to call yourself my dad, not if you're not ready. I understand. No accusation, no resentment. Just the early wisdom of a child who has learned to hold herself upright in her own loneliness. Ethan felt something tighten across his chest. Your name is Grace, right? Grace nodded. Mom said you were very busy. It wasn't your fault. She looked down at her shoes. She never said you were a bad person. A simple sentence, but enough to make his heart fall into a place he didn't know existed. Ethan drew a slow breath. I want to be here, if you'll let me. Grace studied him for a long moment, as if measuring whether this presence would stay or fade. Finally, she lifted her hand. A tiny hand, warm, slightly trembling. Ethan took it, and in that moment he understood his life had just changed course. They entered the ICU. The room was dim, quiet, like time had paused within it. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor continued, unhurried, unchanging. Lily lay there. Her face was pale from sedation. The slender bridge of her nose was exactly as he remembered. Her lips were dry and colorless. IV lines, ventilator tubes, gauze, all surrounding a body that had fought too hard, too long, alone. Ethan stepped closer, one slow step at a time. He did not offer an explanation. He did not lift a hand to hide the wetness in his eyes. He simply placed his hand over hers gently, as though touching too firmly might disturb old pain. His voice was tight when he spoke. I'm here. Grace stood beside him, placing her small hand over her mother's. She didn't cry, she simply stood, waiting, just as she had done for years. And in that silence, no one used the word family. But in that exact moment, a door quietly opened for it to become real. Morning arrived slowly in the ICU, as though even the sunlight had to soften itself before entering a place this fragile. A pale orange dawn filtered through the large window, spreading gently across the walls. Ethan was still sitting beside Lily's bed, in the exact position he had been in since he placed his hand over hers the night before. His shoulders leaned slightly forward, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, the tendons along his wrist drawn tight from not daring to let go. He was not a man accustomed to waiting. His life ran on momentum, precision, speed. But in this room, he had no power to command anything. He could only stay. Grace slept on a small chair near the window, curled inside the blanket a nurse had brought just before dawn. A stuffed rabbit lay tucked beneath her chin, like a loyal companion that had never left her. Around 7 a.m., a night shift nurse walked in quietly. She checked Lily's vitals, changed an IV bag, then glanced at Ethan with a look that was both clinical and gently human, the kind of compassion that ICU rooms rarely had to spare. "She's stabilizing, little by little," the nurse said softly, as though sound itself might disturb the silence. "We've managed the internal bleeding. Her lungs need time to recover. Right now, she's under light sedation so her body doesn't have to work too hard." Ethan tried to nod, but he couldn't pull his eyes away from Lily's hand beneath his. The nurse scribbled a few notes on the chart at the foot of the bed, then left, and the room settled again into something like a long, careful breath. Grace woke without a sound. She slid off the chair, pulled her small canvas shoes on, and stepped to Ethan's side. She didn't ask, "Will Mom wake up?" She didn't ask, "Are we going home?" At Grace's age, waiting didn't happen through words. It happened through quiet eyes, a stuffed rabbit held close and staying exactly where she needed to be. Ethan looked down at her. "Would you like some breakfast?" His voice softened, not because he forced it, but because something tightly wound in him was slowly loosening. Grace shook her head. "I want to stay near Mom." Ethan glanced through the window to the hallway, where the morning shift was beginning and the lobby was growing busier. He understood then what he needed to do. Not just for Lily, but for this child, the child who had learned never to ask for anything. "I'll go get something," he said. "Would you like warm milk?" Grace thought for a moment, then nodded, just once, very small. Not because she wanted it, but because she was beginning to believe he would come back. The weight of that belief was quiet, but heavy. The hospital cafeteria in the early morning always held a smell that was impossible to name. Fresh coffee, toasted bread, and the faint trace of disinfectant still lingering from the night. Ethan stood in line, fingers resting lightly on the plastic tray. He couldn't remember the last time he stood in a line like this. His life had been full of private elevators, private cars, private rooms, everything insulated behind invisible glass. But this morning, he was just a man afraid of losing someone. He returned with 2 cups of warm milk and a buttered roll. Grace sat on the bench outside the ICU hallway, feet dangling, eyes fixed on the ICU door as if, by looking long enough, her mother might simply step out. Ethan sat beside her, saying nothing at first. He offered the milk. Grace took it with both hands. "Mom likes cinnamon," she whispered, like she was sharing something delicate and precious. "She sprinkles a little on warm milk. When she's sick, she says cinnamon feels like someone is there, even when no one is." Ethan felt something shift inside his chest. Not breaking, opening. "We'll get cinnamon this afternoon," he said. "When she gets better, she'll smell it." Grace nodded. This wasn't loud, triumphant hope. This was a quiet, steady hope, the kind carried by people who have already known loss. By late afternoon, the ICU attending physician stepped into the room, holding a tablet of medical charts and documents. He carried the demeanor of someone well accustomed to delivering bad news, yet careful enough to recognize the rare moment when the news was good. "She's responding well to treatment," he reported. "If everything continues to stabilize, tonight we'll begin reducing the sedation to see how her body responds on its own. I can't promise anything yet, but this is a positive sign." Grace tightened her grip on Ethan's hand, not out of fear, but out of sudden, overwhelming relief. Ethan nodded. "How long until she can wake?" "Could be a few hours, could be longer. The brain needs time to find its rhythm again." The doctor paused, his gaze settling on Ethan. "She'll need close support when she wakes, not just physically, emotionally too." Ethan understood, and he didn't avoid it anymore. "I'll stay." The words weren't loud, they weren't dramatic, but their weight was deep enough that Grace turned to him, as if she had just heard a promise she had waited a very long time for. That night, when the ICU lights dimmed to a softer glow and the monitors clicked in steady, unhurried beats, Ethan remained in his chair. Grace slept on the small seat nearby. No one moved from their place. And then, slowly, Lily's finger stirred. A movement so small it could have been missed if one wasn't looking closely enough. Ethan stopped breathing. "Lily?" His voice sounded like it had been held under stone for years. Her eyelids flickered, opening bit by bit, as if she were swimming upward from deep water. White light, heavy breath, the world returning one heartbeat at a time. Lily saw the ceiling first. Then, slowly, she turned her head and saw Ethan. There was no dramatic calling of names, no sudden embrace, no flood of tears like in the stories people tell themselves will happen. She simply spoke, her voice so faint it was almost only air. "Where's Grace?" Ethan's eyes followed to the chair by the door. "She's right here, she's okay." A long exhale slipped from Lily's lips, not like a sigh, but like a breath her body had been holding for days. Silence lingered before she looked back at Ethan, eyes no longer clouded by medication, but clear with sharp, aching awareness. "Don't think that just because I'm lying here, things between us get to start over." It wasn't gentle, it wasn't forgiving, it was the truth. Ethan nodded, and his words landed slowly, deliberately, like they were being set down, not spoken. "I know." Lily stared at him a long time, as though trying to see whether his words were real or simply guilt taking shape in the form of convenience. "Did you come because of me?" she asked, "or because of Grace?" Ethan didn't look away. For the first time in years, he didn't choose the answer that would make him seem better. "I came for both of you. But if I have to name the reason that brought me here first, I came because of Grace." Lily didn't nod. She didn't smile. She didn't say anything at all, but she didn't let go of his hand. And sometimes in life, not letting go is the gentlest form of recognition there is. Lily was moved to the recovery ward on the third day, once her breathing had stabilized and sedation had been reduced. The new room no longer carried the endless cold light of the ICU. It was warmer, with cream-colored curtains and small potted plants placed deliberately to soften the sterility. Even so, the air remained thin and still, as if every movement had to slow down to avoid disturbing something delicate, mending from within. Grace sat close beside her mother, leaning lightly against her shoulder. She didn't ask whether it hurt. She didn't ask when they would go home. Perhaps, in a way, only children who have witnessed the fragility of adults can understand. She knew that silence was sometimes the kindest answer. Ethan stood by the window, hand resting on the sill, looking out over the small hospital garden where a few winter elms still clung to their leaves. He didn't keep his distance out of fear of being rejected. but because he understood that his presence now needed to be quiet, patient, steady, not something that crashed in like a late apology. A nurse guided Lily through slow breathing exercises. "Each breath is a step," she said, gentle but firm. "Not strong, just steady." Lily followed. Her body was so weak that lifting her hand a few centimeters caused her face to tighten. But there was no complaint. Ethan watched, and it felt like something invisible tightened around his chest. He had once called her fragile. He had once called her too emotional. He had once believed she didn't understand his world. But now, watching her fight for each breath, he saw clearly. She had always been stronger than him, just strong in a way that made no noise. That afternoon, a hospital social worker came to meet with Ethan and Lily about the post-discharge care plan. She spread the documents across the table like a map of a new life. Medications, breathing exercises, follow-up appointments, and most importantly, the need for 24/7 support for at least the first 4 weeks. "The body will recover," she said calmly, "but the psychological recovery after trauma is just as important. The caregiver needs patience, and the stability of the environment will play a major role." Lily pressed her lips together. She was used to handling things alone, finding work on her own, raising her child on her own, surviving alone. The idea of depending on someone again felt like a door being opened and feared at the same time. Grace looked from her mother to Ethan, then back to her mother. Not urging, just waiting to see whether this time the adults would keep their own promises. Ethan placed his hand on the table, steady, without hesitation. "I'll take care of the caregiving," he said, voice low and firm, like a commitment carved in stone. "I'll rearrange my work so I can be here full time." Lily turned to him. Her eyes no longer held anger, but they did not hold forgiveness either. They were the eyes of someone who had once been left, trying to understand whether this time could be real. "Ethan," she said softly, but slowly, as if placing each word down like a brick. "You can't show up only when there's a crisis. You can't stay because of guilt. Grace grew up without you. If you step into her life again and leave again, the wound will be bigger than the first one." Grace didn't blink, but her small body tightened just slightly. Children hear everything, even when they don't speak. Ethan drew a long breath. "I know," he replied. "And I know that if I say I've changed, that means nothing. I won't ask you to believe me right away. I'll let you see. Every day. No flourish. No dramatic speech. Just truth." Lily didn't answer immediately, but she didn't say no. And sometimes, in a life that has been closed off for a long time, not closing the door is already a very large acceptance. 2 days later, Lily was discharged. New York was covered in a light rain, the kind that turns footsteps on the sidewalk into soft, melancholy sound. The hospital transport car took the 3 of them to Lily's small apartment, where everything was arranged neatly in the way of someone who has learned to live with limited space and limited time. A small living room, a gray fabric sofa worn down at one corner, a tiny cactus near the window, and a wall covered in Grace's drawings, suns, houses, cats, and stick figures holding hands, taped up with strips of multicolored tape. Ethan stood in the doorway, looking at the apartment like he was looking into a life he should have been part of all along. Grace removed her mother's coat and hung it carefully. The motion was so practiced that even an adult could not help but watch in silence. No one taught her. She learned because she had to. Ethan helped Lily sit down on the sofa. "Do you want warm water or ginger tea?" he asked. Lily looked up, slightly surprised. "Ginger tea." He nodded and went to the kitchen without looking around for where anything was. as if he had lived here for a long time. Grace watched him go, then sat beside Lily, resting her head gently on her mother's shoulder. "Are you okay?" Lily whispered. Grace nodded. "I'm okay, because you're home." The answer made Lily close her eyes for a moment, as if holding her tears in place required real strength. Their first dinner together felt strange, but gentle. Ethan tried to make chicken soup, a dish he only knew from an 8-minute cooking video that he watched 3 times in a row. The soup was a little bland, the bread a little burnt, the carrots cut a bit too thick, but Grace ate every spoonful, holding the bowl as if cradling something soft inside her chest. Lily didn't compliment, and she didn't criticize. She simply watched, and there was something very different in that watching. Midway through the meal, Ethan said, "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. I know you and Grace learned how to live without me. I won't try to step into a place that isn't open yet. I just want to be here every day." Lily set her spoon down, fingers trembling slightly from the ache still lingering in her chest. "Being here isn't the hard part," she said slowly. "The hard part is staying." Ethan nodded. "I'll stay." Lily looked directly into his eyes, not to test him, not to check whether he was lying, but to see whether he was clear. Grace glanced between the 2 adults, then suddenly delivered a verdict. Simple, honest, in a way no adult could ever imitate. "Dad can eat dinner with me every day, that's enough." Lily turned to her child. Ethan looked at Grace, and something in his chest tightened. There was no miracle in that room, no dramatic reunion, no sweeping emotional crescendo, just a very small invitation. And a man who, for the first time in his life, knew how to treasure something small more than all he had ever built. Night fell. Grace was asleep, Rabbit tucked beside her. The apartment was quiet, with only the sound of rain outside the balcony. Lily leaned back against the wall, one hand resting on her aching ribs. Ethan stood a few steps away, not approaching, but not retreating either. "I used to think," Lily said softly, "that being alone was the safest thing. Because if no one touches you, then no one can leave you." Ethan felt the words land in him like a slow, deep hand pressed against his chest. "But," Lily continued, "being alone isn't peace. It's just the habit of loneliness." She lifted her eyes to him, and for the first time since the ICU, there were no bars in her gaze. "I'm learning how to let someone be here again. But that person has to stay, not for a day, not for a week, but every day." Ethan nodded. He didn't rush forward. He didn't make bigger promises. He didn't ask for forgiveness. "I'll stay, one day at a time." No dramatic vow, no cinematic pause, just a sentence that touched the ground, steady and real. Lily released a slow breath, the kind held too long inside the chest. She didn't reach out. He didn't step closer, but the space between them, for the first time, was no longer a wall. Sometimes love doesn't return with a call or an embrace. Sometimes it returns in 2 people standing close without fear. Time didn't move by the ticking of a clock, but by very small shifts in that small home. On the first morning, Ethan took Grace to school. The scene was nothing like the golden, charming movie moments people imagine. There was no glowing sunlight, no cheerful music, just the kitchen carrying the warm smell of pancake batter and a man trying his best to do something he had never imagined himself doing. Ethan stood at the stove, pan in one hand, spatula in the other, trying to flip pancakes without burning them. The first batch burned. The second was raw. The third, slightly misshapen, but at least evenly golden. Grace sat at the table, hair messy, hugging her rabbit, half asleep. watching him with the calm of a child who has already seen all kinds of chaotic mornings. "We can have cereal," she said softly, offering a solution, not a judgment. Ethan blinked, then smiled, a small, real smile, unforced. "Okay, but pancakes will return." He said it not because the pancakes were good, but because he didn't intend to give up. Grace shrugged, but the corner of her mouth tugged upward, just a little. That was a small victory, and small victories are what build a family. On the way to school, Ethan walked at the same slow pace as Grace's small steps. The city in the morning still held a trace of mist, the trees along the sidewalk still wet. Adults walked quickly, rushed, busy, but the two of them weren't running from anything anymore, so they walked unhurried. "What's your favorite subject?" Ethan asked, gently, not to fill silence, but to open a small door. "Music," Grace answered. "Why music?" Grace thought for a moment, then spoke with the kind of honesty that has no sugarcoating. "Because in music, people don't have to say a lot, but they still understand each other." Ethan paused mid-step. He understood better than anyone what it felt like to live in a world where words are never enough to say what's inside. He knelt, retying Grace's shoelace that had come undone when she got out of the car. "I understand," he murmured. Grace looked at him, surprised, as if she hadn't expected him to answer in a way that matched the rhythm of her heart so precisely. At the school gate, a morning shift teacher observed them. Grace turned back, without hesitation, without pause. "This is my dad." The sentence landed like a clean, round musical note. Not loud, not dramatic, but true, in a way that no one could deny. And sometimes when something is finally called by its right name, it finds its place in the world on its own. In the weeks that followed, Lily's home was no longer a home of two, but a home of three. No one declared it. But there were small signs. Ethan knew exactly where Lily kept the ginger tea. Grace could tell Ethan's footsteps in the hallway, slower when he worried, steadier when he was content. Lily no longer startled at the sound of the door opening. In the afternoons, Ethan worked online in the corner of the living room, while Grace sat on the floor drawing, her pencil looping and wandering. Lily lay curled on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, sometimes glancing over at the other two as if watching a scene she wasn't sure she deserved to have. No one said the word family, but everything in that room was quietly saying it. Then, one evening, when the hospital called to inform them that Lily's accident had not been an accident at all, but an intentional forced collision, the air in the apartment changed. No one cried. No one slammed a table. There was just a deep, sinking silence. Ethan didn't ask who would do this. He only asked Lily, "Do you want to face this alone?" Lily looked at him for a long time. "No." A word so soft it could have been breath, but for someone who had lived by self-reliance, saying no was a door swinging wide open. Ethan worked with the police, with lawyers, with Lily's former landlord, not using power to crush, not using money to overpower, but using the law, patience, and transparency. Not to prove that he was strong, but to prove he would not leave them again. After 2 weeks of statements, evidence, and legal procedures, the matter finally came to an end. The people who once lingered in the shadows, watching Lily, were forced to step back. Contact was cut. Distance was enforced. No more footsteps echoing down the hallway at night. No more sense of eyes following her from behind. Lily didn't say anything when the news came. She simply stood still for a long time, one hand resting lightly over her heart, feeling her heartbeat slow, gradually, to something quiet and steady. The next morning, when she stepped outside, the wind passed through her hair like a long exhale of spring. And for the first time in months, She didn't have to turn around, just that. But sometimes peace returns exactly that quietly. Yet the deeper change wasn't outside, it was inside. Lily had seen that Ethan hadn't returned because of guilt. He had returned to build. One late afternoon at the end of April, the light at the window was soft like honey, and the breeze carried the faint scent of pollen. Ethan called Grace into the kitchen. "I need your help with something important," he said, serious enough that Grace thought something big had happened. "Help wash dishes?" Grace asked, hands on her hips. Very small hands, but very official. Ethan let out a quiet laugh. "Much bigger than washing dishes." Grace tilted her head. "But Mom is sleeping. We shouldn't wake her." Ethan sat down beside her, his voice softening. "Right. This is bigger than waking her." He lowered his voice. "I want to ask your mom if she would like us to become a real family. And I want you to help me get ready." Grace didn't answer right away. She just looked at Ethan for a long, long moment. Then she hugged him, slow, tight, no words needed. "I've been waiting for this day for so long." They didn't prepare anything elaborate. Grace drew a card, 3 people holding hands under a sky full of stars. Ethan baked an apple pie, not burnt, not too sweet, not perfect, just made with hands and with heart. When Lily stepped into the kitchen, both of them were waiting. Ethan didn't kneel. He didn't hold out a diamond ring. He simply spoke, with a steady voice, the voice of someone who has finally found the right direction. "I won't promise to be perfect. I will make mistakes. There will be times I don't know what to do, but I promise I will be here, every day, not out of obligation but because I love you, and because I love Grace. If you agree, let's call ourselves a family." Grace placed her hand on her mother's, the smallest but strongest anchor. "I want that too." Tears finally slipped down Lily's cheeks, not bursting, not choking. Just the quiet tears of a long winter finally melting. "I agree." 2 months later, their wedding took place in the garden behind a small suburban church, where golden string lights hung between 2 birch trees and wooden chairs were wiped clean by kind neighbors. There were no extravagant gowns, no grand arrangements. Just Lily in a simple white dress, her hair adorned with a wildflower Grace had picked from the nearby field. Grace was the flower girl. Her shoes were a little too big. She stumbled a bit when she walked. She smiled like the sun. Ethan stood waiting at the end of the aisle. There was no lavish ceremony, no master of ceremony, just the soft wind and the sound of hearts finding each other again. When they took each other's hands, they didn't speak long vows. They simply said, 3 people, 1 home. And that was enough. At the end of the day, when the sky shifted to a tender shade of orange, Ethan lifted Grace and spun her gently. Her laughter rang like light glass bells. Lily stepped closer and linked her arm through his. No rush, no effort, just closeness finding its rightful place. The 3 of them walked toward the small house where the windows glowed warm with evening light, where the smell of apple pie still lingered in the kitchen, where a pair of tiny shoes lay crooked beside the rug. A place where they no longer had to wonder whether they belonged to one another. They didn't speak on the walk home. But the silence was not empty, it was full. Full with matched breaths, full with steps taken together, full with something lost for a long time, now returned. Because some kinds of happiness do not arrive like fireworks. They come like a small lamp being lit every evening, a hand that does not let go, a door that does not close too soon. And this time, when life tested them, no one let go first. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. If this story meant something to you, let us know in the comments. We really do listen. Share this with someone who loves a good story. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next soul-stirring journey.